Bolsheviks knew that the real cause of the collapse of the Tsarist regime was a combination of military defeats and the internal revolt. So, if a new war were to come, they had to prevent internal revolt as much as possible. Then, a new war was a mortal danger. And in the late 1930s, they were absolutely sure that the war was imminent. Why? Yes, there were quite a number of signs that the war was coming. First, the Japanese attack in Manchuria in 1931. If you look at the map, you will see that the Manchuria, part of Manchuria occupied by the Japanese, was right on the Soviet border. Then, of course, the attitude of the Western powers to the civil war in Spain. The Soviets supported the Republican side of the civil war. They sent the advisors, the arms, the material assistance, and by the way, the Republicans paid in gold for it because they had gold reserves. The amount, the quantity of Soviet aid was enormous. Even in 1956, the Soviet government announced that Spain still owed $50 million to the Soviet government. And yet, the Republicans suffered defeats. Stalin thought that these defeats were the result of treason. Treason, first of all, among the top command, and he demanded purges. But the Western countries did not do anything. They kept their neutrality. And here in this cartoon, what you see is the British who are saying to Mussolini, "Fair play, chap, you are not helping the aggressor." For Stalin, this meant that they would not help if something were to happen to the Soviet Union. Generally speaking, Western policy of appeasement towards Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, this policy which was followed from 1935 until 1939, it was quite clear to Stalin that they were afraid. They were retreating at every possible turn. They could not counterpoise anything against Hitler's pressure. But particularly the Munich Agreement in September 1938 showed Stalin that the Soviet Union is on its own. Well, you know that Munich Agreement was the agreement between France, Britain, Italy, and Germany. It allowed the Nazi Germany to annex a portion of Czechoslovakia, Sudetenland. The Czechs called it Munich betrayal because Czechoslovakia had a treaty with Britain and France and expected to be supported. This did not happen. There was often a direct correlation between international events and Stalin's internal actions. For example, in 1936, Italy and Japan signed treaties with Germany. The Japanese treaty was openly called Anti-Comintern Pact, which meant that it was directly aimed against the Soviet Union. It was at that time that Yezhov was appointed head of NKVD. Republican defeats in Spain, and immediately Stalin started the trial of anti-Trotskyist Center in January 1937. Stalin's campaign against the military was also, to a degree, the result of Spanish Republican defeat. Stalin said that the Soviet military wanted to turn the Soviet Union into another Spain. The Japanese occupation of China in 1937 resulted in the eviction of Koreans from the border areas of the Soviet Union, areas bordering with Chinese areas occupied by Japan. But also the removals of other nationalities started at that time because Stalin was worried that they would somehow be used by Russian enemies for their purposes. Stalin forestalled imagined dangers and ignored the real ones. He got rid of competent and entrepreneurial and energetic cadres, and his society lived in a state of paranoia and fear. There was no trust. People were afraid to report real problems in their industries and institutes. There was no independent initiative. There was no personal responsibility. Personal opinions were a danger zone. So people tried to avoid all that at all costs. New Stalin's elite. Well, this is the top of it. You can see these people, members of the Politburo at the Central Committee in 1939. Stalin, Andreev, Voroshilov, Zhdanov, Kaganovich, Kalinin, Mikoyan, Vyacheslav Molotov, Khrushchev, Beria. Beria is cut out after his arrest in 1953, and finally Shvernik. The Central Committee, it was now used only for propaganda and as a pool for selecting cadres for top positions. Zhdanov and Malenkov were appointed to lead the party apparatus, but Stalin was responsible for absolutely everything. He was responsible for the top decisions. He was relying on his opinions only. And all initiative came only from Stalin. All decisions were made by him. So he was solely responsible for all these decisions. In May 1941, Stalin appointed himself as chairman of the Council of People's Commissars. That means that he now combined the Soviet and the party power. So what was the meaning of this terror, except for Stalin's power? Here is the opinion of Vyacheslav Molotov. 1937 was necessary if you consider that after the revolution we were slashing left, right and center, and we were victorious. But enemies of different sorts remained, and in the face of the impending danger of fascist aggression, they might unite. We owe the fact that we did not have a fifth column during the war to 1937. But there are other opinions. Alexander Vasilevsky, Marshal of the USSR, thought, but for 1937 we might not have had 1941. Hitler's decision to start the war against the USSR in 1941 was based to a large extent on his assessment of the degree of the destruction of the Soviet military cadres. It is for you to work out your own opinion.